be seated now, if you'd like.
Like sweet, sweet honey on my lips, like the sound of the symphony to my ears, like holy water on my skin. Dead man walking, slave to sin. I want to know about being born again. I need you, oh God, I need you. Take me to the riverside, take me under baptized. I need you, oh God, I need you. Your forgiveness is like sweet, sweet honey on my lips, like the sound of a symphony to my ears, like holy water on my skin. Your grace, God, I need you every day. I need you. I don't want to abuse your grace, God, I need it every day. It's the only thing that ever really makes me want to change. Your forgiveness is like sweet, sweet honey on my lips, like sound of symphony to my ears, like holy water. Your forgiveness is like sweet, sweet honey on my lips, shackles and chains. I've been freed and forgiven. I'm not going back, I'll never be the same. That's why I sing, all my hope is in Jesus. Thank God that yesterday's gone. All my sins are forgiven, and I've been washed by the blood. Well, there's a kind of thing that just breaks a man, breaking down to his knees. God, I've been broken more this time too, yes, Lord. And He picked me up and He showed me what it means. That's why I sing, all my hope is in Jesus. And thank God that yesterday's gone, and all my sins are forgiven. I've been washed by the blood. All my hope is in Jesus. Thank God that yesterday's gone. All my sins are forgiven. I've been washed by the blood. I've been washed by the blood. Had many tears and sorrows, questions for tomorrow. There've been times I didn't know right from wrong, but in every situation, God gave blessed consolation that my trials would only make me strong. I've been a lot of places, seen a lot of faces, times I felt so all alone. But in my lonely hours, precious lonely hours, just lets me know I was His own. Through it all, I've learned to trust in Jesus. I've learned to trust in God. Through it all, I've learned to depend upon God's word. I'll thank Him for the mountains, thank Him for the valleys, thank Him for the storms He's brought me through. For if I never had a problem, I wouldn't know He couldn't solve them. I never know what faith in God could do. That's why I sing, through it all. It was through it all. I've learned to trust in Jesus. I've learned to trust in God. Through it all, I've learned to depend upon God's word. in Jesus. I've learned to trust in God through it all. Through it all, I've learned to depend upon God's word.
Good evening. Thank you all for coming tonight. For those that do not know me, my name is Jessica Kaler, and I'm the daughter of Cindy Ledford, one of the ones who is helping to organize tonight. Before we begin, I wanted to take a moment and speak about Crystal. I first met Crystal about 20 years ago when I started middle school, and I went to school with Crystal's oldest son, Shiloh. However, it wasn't for another couple of years before our relationship would start to grow. Throughout our relationship, we've experienced love, heartache, happiness, tragedy, and many blessings. One of those, which is Crystal's daughter, Chesney, who's here with us tonight. Over the time, our friendship grew to family, and Crystal has become a wonderful mentor in my life. She's been a constant, and she's been a steady, probably more times than she even realizes. She's experienced great loss and pain, yet she's remained loyal and faithful, and she's found her strength in God. I pray that tonight you are as blessed as I have been by having her in my life all these years. And I hope you're always reminded that your faith is bigger than your fears.
I'd like to say thank you for allowing me to come out and share my testimony. I've been asked several times in the past if I would give my testimony, but I was always afraid to. I didn't understand that I had a testimony. But I had one of the ladies at our church come up and ask me if I'd give it to our women's group, and I told her to let me pray about it. Well, God told me that if I did not give my testimony, then He would take it away from me. I didn't understand what He meant, but I didn't want to test Him. So I told them that I would give it. But my thing is, I cannot stand up here and talk to you like I am right now. I have to read it. So just bear with me. Okay. In order to understand how faithful God has been in my life, you will need to understand the circumstances of my life and how God began putting my life together even as early as 6 months old. I was fortunate to have been raised by godly grandparents. God knew even at the age of 6 months I was going to need a strong Christian background to overcome what life would eventually throw at me, and my grandfather gave me that foundation. As I grew, I watched my grandfather trust God with all areas of his life. He worked in a machine shop and did not make a whole lot of money. One thing I remember the most about my grandfather and his faith in God was each payday. When he cashed his paycheck, he would come home and he and my grandmother would always sit at the kitchen table and he would lay out their money. He would begin separating it. The first thing he did was count out their tithes, then bills, then grocery money, and if at the end there was enough left over, he would always say, "We can go to the fish camp this week." I never heard him complain about not having enough money or needing anything. If at times, and there were times, there wasn't enough money, he would always say, "God gets his no matter what, and the rest He will take care of." I never remember my grandparents' bills going unpaid or them wanting for anything. Each night before we went to bed, my grandfather, whom I always called Daddy, and my grandmother, Mama, would always read the Bible, and we would all get down beside the bed and pray before we went to sleep. In his prayers, he would always say, "Remember the lost." At the age of 12, I woke up one morning with my mouth and my face drawn to one side. My grandmother immediately took me to the doctor. She was told I had a severe case of Bell's palsy. The doctor gave me medication and told her if I did not show signs of improvement in a few weeks, the palsy could cause permanent disfigurement. Within a few weeks, My face had not shown any signs of improvement. That night, before my grandparents and I went to bed, my grandfather asked me if I wanted to pray for God's healing. I told him I did. My grandfather told me that in order for me to be healed, I needed to believe without a doubt that God could heal me, and I did. I told him I believed. We knelt beside my bed that night and we prayed for God to heal my face and make it normal again. The next morning, when I woke up, my face was back to normal. My grandparents taught me how to pray and to have faith in God. Rick and I went to church together, and when I was about 13 years old, he was 5 years, 4 months, and 11 days older than I was. I didn't care. I fell head over heels for this 19-year-old. Of course, I was told time and time again by my parents it was infatuation and he was too old for me. I didn't care. I told God I wanted to marry him, and if I couldn't have him, I didn't want anyone. Every night I prayed for him to love me. Finally, I turned 16, and my grandparents allowed me to date. I was so excited. I thought finally Rick would ask me out. Well, he didn't. We were friends, but never more than that. We would do things together as a group, but never as a date. I finally became so heartbroken that I began praying for God to take the love that I felt for Rick away, if it wasn't his will for me to love him. That never happened. As time went on, my love just seemed to get stronger and stronger, and I would pray harder for God to take the feelings away that I had for him. Finally, at the age of 18, Rick asked me out, and we were married a year and a half later. After a year of marriage, we decided we wanted to start a family. We tried for 3 years, but I never got pregnant. The doctors ran tests and found out I was not ovulating and needed help in that area. So I went on fertility medication. Within a few months, I became pregnant, but miscarried after a few weeks of conception. Rick and I began praying and asking God if it be his will to help us to have children. A few months later, I was pregnant. The doctors told me that it was a very strong possibility that I could not get pregnant again on my own without the fertility medication. At the time, that didn't bother us. We were so happy that I was pregnant. On May 20th, 1986, after 18 hours of labor, Christopher Shiloh Stewart came into this world a month early, weighing 7 pounds 6 ounces. He had to spend a few nights in an incubator because his lungs were retracting due to being born a month early. But after a few days, his lungs were fine. However, Shiloh became jaundiced fast. I was sent home with him a week after he was born and was told to bring him back within a week to have a blood test to see if his bilirubin was down. At that time, they assured us everything was fine, and all we needed to do was to put him in the sunlight a few hours a day. A week later, on Sunday afternoon, we took Shiloh back to the hospital. They took a sample of blood, and we were on our way back home. Just minutes after we returned home, the telephone rang, and I answered it. It was the hospital. They said the test showed that the bilirubin had elevated even more, and the doctors wanted to admit him. When we returned to the hospital, they put us on the pediatric ward. Shiloh was stripped down to his diaper and laid in front of a window where the sunlight could get to him. The nurses came in every 30 to 45 minutes and pricked his heel to get the blood test for the bilirubin. I was breastfeeding, so the doctor said they wanted to take him off the breast milk and put him on formula. Around 5:30 that afternoon, the doctor came into the room and told us that Shiloh needed to be taken to Charlotte Memorial Hospital because Gastonia did not have the right equipment to treat him, but that Charlotte would. And when we arrived, there would be a team of doctors waiting on us. The pediatrician explained that Shiloh had developed bilirubin anemia. When Shiloh was born, his body's blood type, which was A, was trying to take over, but my blood type O was not being expelled out of his body. Therefore, my blood type saw his blood type as a threat and began attacking Shiloh's blood cells and destroying them, which was causing his problems. The doctor continued to explain that the levels in his body had well exceeded the safe limit, and if they did not get my blood cells out of his body, Shiloh could have brain damage or he could die. After hearing all this, Rick and I both began crying. All I could think about was I was killing my son. I began to pray for God not to take my son. He was only a week old, and I had not gotten to spend time with him, to please not take him, not now. Rick began to pray and ask God to let him please keep him for just a little while longer. I told Rick to call my granddaddy at church. He told him what was going on. The pastor immediately stopped the service and everyone prayed for Shiloh. When we arrived at Charlotte, there was a team of doctors that met us just inside the door. They immediately took Shiloh out of my arms to test his bilirubin levels. Another doctor explained to us what they would do from here. He said Shiloh would have to have a blood transfusion to get my blood expelled from his body. Rick and I then were escorted to the pediatric ward and put in a room to wait for Shiloh. Little did that doctor know that God was taking care of the situation and our prayers had already been answered. Shiloh's bilirubin levels had come down and they did not have to do a transfusion, and his brain cells were normal. When they brought him back to the room, he was in an incubator under the Billy lights with IVs in him. I was told I could not take him out from under the lights at all. I was to put my arms in the glove-like things on the side of the incubator, feed and burp him that way. I could only open the door of the incubator to change his diaper. I wanted to hold my little boy because he needed me. I would put my hands inside the gloves of the incubator. I would cry and tell him how much I loved him and that Jesus was going to take care of him, and it wouldn't be too long before he could go home. I stayed in Shiloh with Shiloh a week in the hospital, and God did take care of him, and he sent him home a healthy boy a week later. Our lives were perfect with Shiloh. Then God decided to make it even better. 6 months after Shiloh was born, I found out I was pregnant. What a surprise, especially after the doctor said I would probably have to go on fertility medication in order to get pregnant again. 9 months later, Crystal Stewart decided to make a grand entrance. She woke me up around midnight with pains in my back. I could not lay, and I did not want to wake up Rick, so I made a bed on the couch. My back just kept hurting, but I didn't even think about being in labor. I was expecting everything to be like it was with Shiloh. My water breaks, go to the hospital, get put in bed with heart monitors on, remain in pain for 18.5 hours, push for 2 hours, and of course use forceps to get her out. Why not? That is the way it works, right? Especially since the doctor said she would be around 9 pounds, and Shiloh was only 7 pounds, and he was a month premature. The Lamaze nurse did say my labor time could be cut down to 1/2 the time, so I thought, okay, 9.5 hours of labor. Well, Sierra was not going to cooperate like Shiloh did, or maybe God thought Rick and I needed some excitement. After walking the floors for an hour, I decided to get in a hot tub of water to see if that would stop my back from hurting. It didn't. It made it worse. So I got out and decided to wake up Rick and see if he could help me. I woke him up and told him, I think I may be in labor or something is wrong with my back. He gets his watch, times the pain to see if there's a pattern. Sure enough, there was. My pain was coming every 2 minutes. He jumps up and says, we need to get to the hospital. I tell him to call his mama and let her come up and tell me whether I need to go to the hospital. I was determined I was not going to the hospital to be probed on for 9 or 18 hours. Rick's mom, Daisy, was an RN and had worked in labor and delivery at Kings Mountain Hospital, so I trusted her judgment. In fact, I would tease Rick's dad and tell him that I was going to let Daisy deliver her. Luckily, Daisy and Ray only lived a few miles down the road. When she came in, she timed my contractions. They were still 2 minutes apart. She told me I needed to go to the hospital. I said okay, but told Rick to go and take a shower. I would be fine, and then we would leave. My pains were getting worse, so I would walk up and down our hall. Within about 5 minutes of Rick getting into the shower, the pains began to be unbearable, and then it happened. I felt the urge to push. I said, "Oh no, Daisy, I have to push." She said, "No, you don't." And I replied, "Yes, I do." She ran down the hall to the bathroom and told Rick, "Crystal says she is ready to have the baby." Rick told her to call an ambulance. As she called the ambulance, I began to panic and cry. I told Rick's mom, "I can't do this. I can't do this." Apparently, from the look on her face and the panic in my voice, my mother-in-law realized it was time to go to work. Her personality changed completely. She went into nurse mode. She was no longer my mother-in-law. She was very sweet, but stern. She said, "Crystal, get on that couch and let's have that baby." I kept repeating, "No, I cannot do this," and crying even more. By this time, Rick got out of the shower and managed to get dressed. He hears the panic in my voice and slaps me and says, "Focus and get on that couch and do what she says." I stopped crying and realized I was going to have this baby at home. I laid down, pushed twice, and at that moment, on September the 30th, 1987, Sierra Nicole Stewart, weighing 9 pounds 5 1/2 ounces, came into this world. About that time, the ambulance pulled up. It was pouring down rain, thundering and lightning, and they just sat in the driveway. Rick opened the front door and yelled at them, and they rolled down the window and asked if anyone had called an ambulance. They did not offer to get out. Rick lost his religion that night and yelled a few choice words to them. They came in the house, and there my mother-in-law was holding Sierra, getting ready to cut the cord. The paramedics went to push her out of the way, and Rick told them to back off, that she knew what she was doing, and to give her anything she wanted. After that, Sierra and I were put in the ambulance and off to the hospital we went, and we were still charged with a delivery fee. As we came into the emergency room, I heard a voice behind me say, "Well, you did have her at home, didn't you?" I looked behind me, and it was my father-in-law with the biggest grin on his face you ever saw. I said, "I told you, Paul, I was having this one at home." After Sierra and I both checked out perfectly healthy, we were taken to our room to enjoy our beautiful baby girl. Once we got into the room, the nurses asked if I was going to breastfeed Sierra. To their shock, I asked them what her billy ribbon was. She looked and said it was elevated. I told her I was not going to go through that again. Therefore, she went on formula. God is so good, though. She had my blood type, and her levels came down quickly. Shiloh and Sierra was the light of our lives. What more could we want? God had blessed us with a boy and a girl. We did everything as a family. If we went anywhere, they went with us, or we did not go. We raised them both in church, kept them active in church, and taught them to pray, read their Bible, and to trust God and ask Him to guide them in all their decisions. At age 13, Shiloh was the first to be saved and baptized. And a year later, at age 13, Sierra was saved and baptized. If you watch closely at the dates and ages with the events and their lives, you'll see a very unique pattern. Shiloh and Sierra was as different as night and day. Shiloh was 6'2" and weighed 270 pounds. He was outgoing, never met a stranger, and could make you laugh even if you were ready to choke him. He could light up a room with just a smile. He loved sports. He was the captain of the wrestling team, ranked 3rd in the state, regionals, and 5th in the state. He loved football most of all. He was WOHS Lineman of the Year, Alan Ford's Cleveland County All-Decade Sports Offensive Line Player for 2003 from Burns High School, and in addition to these activities, He was youth representative and a student volunteer for the Cleveland County Special Olympics. Sierra was the opposite. She was shy and quiet. She was around 5'4" and weighed around 115 pounds, and she loved her bedroom. We always said if we could put a refrigerator and a bathroom in her bedroom, we would never know we had a daughter. She was beautiful, both inside and out. Sierra was a member of the competition team for Dance Reflections, and the last few years she danced with the Academy of Performing Arts. Sierra was editor of the Burns High School newspaper, voted senior superlative most unforgettable, and a member of the Quill and Scroll Club, the National Honor Society, and voted as best and brightest top 10 students in the nation. We were truly blessed with wonderful children that have a bright future ahead of them. In the year 2000, I believe God began to prepare me with circumstances that would help me face events that would change my world forever. I have been very blessed all my life not to have faced tragedy, especially death. My parents, grandparents, and great-grandmother were still alive. I never really knew the bitterness of losing someone you loved, but God was going to change that. In March of 2000, I lost my grandfather to cancer. He had been my father since I was 6 months old. I was spoiled and his little girl. The day he died, God showed me how his love and grace would help me when my world was changing, and how God is right there with you as you take that last breath. I was sitting across from my grandfather at the dinner table. We had just finished Sunday dinner. My grandfather gets up from the table and he tells me he wants to talk with me in the living room. As we walked into the living room, he told me he was dying. I said, "Yes, Daddy, I know." He said, "You don't understand. I am dying now." I tried arguing that he wasn't, but he laid down on the couch and told me he loved me and for me to stay in church and continue to pray for the lost. He once again told me he loved me and would see me in heaven. While he was saying his goodbyes to my son and to my grandmother, I was trying to reach my parents and Rick on the phone. My mother and father came in first. My grandfather told the same thing to my mother that he had told me. Then he asked for my father. His words to my father were very different. My father was not saved at the time, so he told him, "Ted, I love you like a son, and I have always prayed for you. Unless you accept Jesus in your heart, I will not ever see you again, and this is goodbye. My last prayer is for you to be saved." Minutes later, my grandfather very peacefully went to be with the Lord. I stayed by his side and just looked at him. Then my thought went to the scriptures. To be absent in the body is to be present with the Lord. I did not realize at the time that God was showing me not to be afraid of death. God was there the whole time with my grandfather, letting him know he was going home. There was no struggle, just peace. 3 years later, my grandmother passes away. She was on dialysis, and her body had become septic, and there was nothing that could be done. She had asked not to be put on life support, but the doctors did it anyway. When I got to the ER, I went to my mother and reminded her of my grandmother's wishes. Together, we made the decision to have her taken off. She went home to be with the Lord peacefully a short time later. It was not until a few years later that I realized God had been preparing me for a similar situation that would be the most difficult time in my life and would test every ounce of my trust and faith in God. And this time would come 11 months after the death of my grandmother. It was May 1st, prom night. Shiloh and Sierra were both going this year. Sierra was a junior at Burns High School, and Shiloh was a senior. He was 17 years old, 17 days away from graduation, and 18 days away from his 18th birthday. It was an exciting time for both of them. They both looked so beautiful. Shiloh even looked over at his sister and told one of his friends, "Doesn't my sister look beautiful?" Little did we know that would be the last time he ever said, that would be the last thing he ever said about her. After the prom, Shiloh asked if he could spend the night with his friends, so we agreed to let him, but he needed to come home early the next day so we could have pictures made in his tuxedo before returning it. That morning, one of the parents said Shiloh was the first one up. She said he had the biggest smile on his face when he woke up. She said, "I will never forget that." Shiloh came home that morning and asked if he could go over to the girl's house that he had taken to prom. Her mother had invited him over for Sunday dinner. Our appointment was not until 3 o'clock to have his pictures made, so we told him he could, but leave in enough time to get to Old Mills inside Sears for his pictures and be careful because it was raining bad. Rick and I left to meet Shiloh. We arrived about 20 minutes early. Around 2:50, I got this feeling in the pit of my stomach that something was wrong. I asked Rick to call him. Perhaps he was wandering around the mall or inside Sears looking for us. So Rick calls his cell phone. The phone was answered, and he could hear talking, but he could not make out what was being said. Then the phone cuts off. Then my cell phone rang, and it was Shiloh's number. All I heard Rick say was, "We are on our way." My heart began to pound. I knew something was wrong. Rick said that was a police officer. We needed to get to Gaston Memorial. Shiloh has been in an accident, and they're taking him there. As we began walking out of Ola Mills, I wanted to drop to my knees and pray, but I knew I couldn't. I had to go. As we walked to leave the mall, I was praying for God to please let Shiloh be okay. On the way to the hospital, we called our pastor, Fred Hams, and told him what was going on and asked him to pray. When we got to the emergency room, the attendants knew nothing of an ambulance en route. This worried Rick, and I was clueless as to what that could mean. I just kept praying for God to take care of Shiloh. After about an hour, a woman comes over to us and asks us to follow her. Rick said, "Crystal, this isn't good." I didn't understand what Rick meant. My chest began to hurt, but I was still praying for God to let Shiloh be all right. The lady took us into this room and told us to sit down. The police officer came into the room and he started to say, "Your son," but he began to cry. Rick knew, but I was still waiting on him to say, "He's hurt badly, but we'll be okay." That was not the words out of his mouth. "But your son has been killed in an automobile accident." At that moment, I could not breathe. It didn't seem real. No, not my son. This can't happen to us. We're a good family. We had tried to do everything right. Rick said, "Lord, why did you take him? Why did you not take me instead?" I grabbed a hold of Rick, and we both held on to each other, crying in disbelief. We finally asked the officer what happened, and he told us that Shiloh first and foremost was not speeding, and that he had not done anything wrong. Shiloh was coming off 74 to get onto 85, and there had been a wreck minutes before, just past the curb, that had not been cleaned or cleared up. Shiloh could not see around the corner, and when he came up on the wreck, he put on his brakes. But with the amount of rain and the water on the road, it caused his car to hydroplane, and his car began to spin, and his side door hit the back end of a police car. Shiloh was killed instantly. I asked where he was, and I asked to see him. Rick said, "Are you sure?" Yes, I was. I kept thinking they made a mistake, and I wanted to make sure that that was not my son. We walked down this long hall. I paused before I went into the room. I was afraid of what I might see. I said, "Jesus, please don't let this be Shiloh." I walked into the room, and there he was. He looked like he was sleeping. I touched him to wake him, but he wouldn't wake up. I leaned over and kissed him and whispered, "I love you, Shiloh." As we left the room that day, I did not realize that my heart could be so broken. We knew we had to get home to tell Sierra. We knew this would devastate her, and it did. Rick's parents were not in the best of health, so we had Sierra's best friend Katie and her mother Joellen come to stay with her while we went back to Gastonia to tell Rick's parents in person instead of on the telephone. When we returned home, our driveway and yard was full of teenagers and their parents. I got out of the car and did the best I could to hold my head up and walk toward our house. It was total silence as we walked toward the front door. My heart felt as if it was about to explode. I saw Jessica Lefford, Charlotte's girlfriend, as we got closer to the house, and I was afraid to look at her. I wanted to run and hold her, but I could not. I was so afraid if I stopped walking, I would fall to the ground and not get up. I finally got into the house, and Kim Wright, one of our church members, grabbed me and said, "I am so sorry." I got sick to my stomach, and that moment I wanted to die. God knew I needed someone who understood what I was going through. One of Shiloh's friend's mother, Becky Dorsey, came up to me. She had lost her daughter several years ago in a car wreck. She had been driving the car in which her daughter was killed. She survived, but her daughter did not. She came over to me, knelt down, lifted my head up, and said, "Tell me how you feel." I told her I wanted to die. She said, "You will be all right. God will get you through this." I grabbed her and I held on. I needed to hear that. After a while, I let go, took a deep breath, and got up to find Sierra. I could hardly get down the hall. There were teenagers everywhere. I managed to get into Shiloh's room, and there was Sierra. She was being comforted by friends. They were looking through Shiloh's yearbook, passing it around, writing letters to him, laughing and crying. The next morning, we went to make arrangements. The school counselor met us there. She asked if we would send word for the kids to stay in school. They all wanted to leave to get back to our house. They decided to call off the classes for that day and open the gym for a memorial. Later that day, the counselor came to our house and told us that the memorial was beautiful, that Shiloh had such an impact on his senior class that he had brought every class of kids together as one. She said he had broken the barrier between the social groups. I was still having trouble with the fact that Shiloh had died alone. I was his mother. I should have been there. Anytime anything happened in Shiloh's life, I was there. Shiloh told the doctor one time, when he had to have a procedure done, "Just let me look into my mama's face and I know it will be okay." I wasn't there for him to look into my face. How did he react? What went through his mind? I couldn't get over this. God, however, is still faithful, even when you cannot see it. As we walked out of the funeral home just hours before the receiving of friends, someone called out, "Are you Shiloh's parents?" We turned around, and there was this lady. She was beautiful, almost an angel. She was carrying yellow roses, which are my favorite. She handed them to me and told us her name was Angela. She said she was in the car with Shiloh when he died. She went on to say she saw the wreck, saw that it was someone's son, and she said, "I had to go over to him." She got into the passenger side of the car and took hold of his hand. She said, "I knew he was dying, and I didn't want him to die alone." When I took a hold of his hand, I knew he was a Christian because my spirit connected with his, and his death was very peaceful. My heart and spirit at that moment was elated. I knew God had sent an angel to be with him. After the memorial service, everyone gathered at our house, and in one of the conversations I asked Shiloh's best friend, Alex Hemphill, when they went through Shiloh's car for personal effects, if he had seen Shiloh's high school ring. I could not understand where it was. He loved that ring, and I wanted it. A few days went by, and no one seemed to be able to find it in his car. I had lost hope in ever finding it. The man we had our insurance with knew I wanted to find that ring. He told us he would personally go over and search the car. The kids had already searched it, and they could not find it. But he said he would go anyway. The next day, we got a call from him, and he asked us to come by his office. He said he searched that car inch by inch and could not find it. He said I wasn't going to give up. He said I got down on my knees beside the car and prayed, "Dear God, Crystal has lost her son. All she wants is his high school ring, and this will help her get closure. Please help me to find that ring for her." He told us he stuck his hand back under the driver's seat, which he had done several times, and his finger touched something. When he pulled it out, there was Shiloh's ring. Again, God had calmed my heart and healed a hurt. My grief still was great every minute of the day. I was thinking about Shiloh and still in unbelief that God had taken him. I woke up crying, went to sleep crying. I questioned God all the time. Why did you take him? What did I do that caused you to take him? One night, I got in the bathtub to relax. I began sobbing and talking to God. I said, "God, I was taught that you would not put us through what you had not been through yourself. You knew Jesus was going to die, but I didn't know Shiloh was. I only had him for 17 years. Even Jesus' mother knew he was going to die, so why this? I didn't even get to say goodbye to him, and you did your son." At that moment, I heard a voice as clear as day say to me, "Crystal, do you really think if Mary knew that Jesus would have to die, and especially on a cross for people's sins, that she would have ever consented to be Jesus' mother?" I was so astonished at what I just heard that I began to cry as hard as I could. And all I could do was ask for forgiveness. Once I calmed down, I said, "I am sorry, God. Please forgive me and help me through this. I cannot go through this without you." Rick and I tried to keep Sierra's life as normal as possible. We knew her heart was broken just as much as ours was. She had asked us if she could go to the beach with her best friend Katie, and we let her go. Rick was on second shift, so that left me at home by myself. I did not do well by myself, so I had to keep busy. I decided I would go through our family pictures and organize them. I got the boxes down, started going through, and of course, that wasn't the best thing to do. Pictures contained Shiloh. So again, I would start crying and grieving. Rick called about that time and told me to go to a room that did not have reminders of Shiloh in it, so I did. I decided to clean out the drawers that contained our bed sheets. I pulled the drawer out and took all the sheets and refolded them nice and neat and put them back in the drawer. When I finished, I pushed the drawer back into the dresser, but it fell off the tracks. I had to pull it all the way out to fix it. When I did, there was a white piece of paper that was lying down on the bottom. I pulled it out. The paper had writing in it. It said, "Bye, Mama, I love you." It was signed Crystal Stewart. After a major meltdown, I looked up to heaven and said, "Bye, Shiloh, I love you too. Thank you, Jesus." God had remembered that night in the bathtub when I told him I didn't get to say goodbye. Summer was coming to a close. School had just started back, and Sierra was a senior this year. Her birthday was just right around the corner, and she would soon be turning 17. With everything she had been through, we were determined to make it a good year for her. She invited her and Shiloh's friends over to celebrate her birthday. It was good to see her happy again. Sierra did not really talk to us much about her brother, but on occasion she would. It was only 2 months before Christmas, and Sierra and I was driving back from the Burns football game. We started talking about Christmas, and she said, more than anything, this Christmas, I will miss Shiloh coming into my bedroom and waking me up Christmas morning, and both of us sneaking down the hall to see what was under the Christmas tree before you and Daddy got up, then running into y'all's bedroom and jumping on the bed to wake y'all up. I had to choke back the tears. I knew then that Christmas would never be the same. The old saying that lightning doesn't strike twice in the same place, well, for Rick and me, it did. It was November the 2nd, 2004, exactly 6 months from when Shiloh had died. Sierra was on her way to school that morning. It was foggy and a light, misty rain. She left extra early that morning. She was going to go by the store and pick up some chewing gum. I had decided to go into work late that morning so I could go with Rick to vote. So we were both home. Around 8:30 a.m. the phone rings. I answered it, and a lady from the high school asked if someone had called and told us that Sierra had been in an accident on Waco Foston Road. My heart stopped. I was afraid. Shiloh had been dead 6 months today, and now I'm getting a phone call that Sierra had wrecked. I managed to say, "Is she okay?" The lady said that an ambulance had been called out, that we needed to go directly to the accident. I got off the phone, went to the bathroom, and told Rick. He was in the shower. He jumped out of the shower quickly and got dressed, and we left. As we got close to the wreck, we passed an ambulance, and a truck was behind it. We did not think that would be her, since there was a truck following closely behind it. We thought she may have collided with someone, and that was who was in the ambulance. A witness said it looked like she had reached down to pick up something out of the floor of her car, possibly her cell phone, when she crossed over the center line. She was speeding and jerked her car back into the lane when she lost control and she ran off the road. The grass was wet from the rain, and there was fog. This caused her car to hydroplane, and she hit a tree head on. Traffic was backed up, so we could not see what was in front of us. The wreck happened in front of a couple's house that we went to church with, Cindy and Mitch Angel, and about 2 miles from our pastor's house. We pulled into Cindy's driveway, and she told us that Sierra was in an ambulance and that Mitch and Pastor Helms was in the truck behind it. We immediately got back in the car, headed for Shelby Hospital. When we got to Shelby, they told us they were assessing her injuries and would let us know something when they finished. A little while later, the doctor came out and told us that her injuries was too severe for them to be treated at Shelby, and they were going to transport her to CMC's trauma unit. He said they would bring her out this way, so if we wanted to speak briefly to her, we could. When she came out, they had some sort of ventilator on her to help her breathe, and she was unresponsive. Rick and I kissed her and told her we loved her and it would be all right. Rick and I knew nothing about the trauma center or even how to get there, so Preacher Helms told us to follow him. He knew exactly where to go. When we got to the trauma unit, they took us to a private family waiting area outside the unit. We waited there until the doctor came out and told us what was going on. We were told Sierra had multiple internal injuries. Her left arm was broken, her pelvic was shattered, and the veins behind her pelvic area were bleeding. They placed her on life support to help sustain her life while they tried to get the bleeding stopped. We were told she had a warming blanket over her body because the life support machine they had her on was called an oscillator that caused her organs to swell, and they had to cut her from her breastbone to her pubic line so the organs could swell without smothering her. With all of this, they told us if they could get the bleeding behind her pelvic area stopped, she would make it. Rick and I went in to see her. I knelt over to kiss her face, and she had blood coming from her eyes, ears, and nose. I wasn't expecting what I saw. I held her little broken arm and tried to talk to her. The tears wouldn't stop. I could hardly believe this was Sierra. When we walked back into the hall, it was full of her friends and their parents. Everyone began to pray for Sierra. The chapel was full. As night started approaching, we asked the kids to go home, and they could come back tomorrow after school. All we could do was pray, and that we did. Early that morning, the nurse told us that they finally got the bleeding to stop, and she will make it. However, the nurse did not mention taking her off the oscillator. We were so excited, crying tears of happiness, that she said Sierra would make it. We did not even think about the oscillator. The nurse went on to tell us that they had depleted their blood and plasma bank, and if anyone wanted to do something, they could give blood. She said Sierra would be in the hospital a very long time, and she would have to have multiple surgeries. We did not care. Our little girl was going to make it. A little while later, a doctor came up to us. He told us he was a neurosurgeon, and his primary function was the brain. He went on to say a mutual friend had asked him to stop by and take a look at Sierra if we didn't mind. We told him we did not mind anything to help her. He asked us if we wanted him to sugarcoat what he was going to say or to be blunt. Rick told him to be blunt. We wanted to know the truth. At this point, we had no idea what he was talking about, or at least I didn't. We thought it was probably something about treatments. Never in a million years were we ready for what he said. He went on to say, I have reason to believe that Sierra is brain dead. He said there's a test I can do that will tell us if she is or not. It will only take about 15 minutes. The joy I had felt earlier just went to fear. Rick and I began to pray. It was not long before the doctor came back. He shut the door and told us that Sierra had no brain function at all. She was brain dead. He said, I have reason to believe she has been brain dead the whole time. Rick and I just held on to each other and cried. The doctor said he would go ahead and take her off the ventilator if we wished, or we could spend a little time with her. We told him we wanted to spend time with her and let her friends say goodbye to her. When he left, Rick turned to Preacher Helms crying and said, why would God not let me just keep one of my children? Several of Sierra's friends and parents had let them stay out of school and come to the hospital to be with us. As we walked out and told the kids what the doctor said, I stopped and I cried out, no, and said to Preacher Helms, God raised Lazarus from the dead. He can do the same for Sierra. Please pray like you have never prayed before. He can heal her. I was not going to let her go. When we all went into the room where Sierra was, I looked around at all her friends and begged God, please give me a miracle. Look at these teenagers. If they see you heal Sierra, that will truly impact their lives forever. Please let her breathe on her own. Preacher Helms prayed a powerful prayer, and as he was praying, something said, open your eyes. And when I did, I saw all Sierra's friends on their knees, crying and praying to God. A peace came over me, and I knew that Sierra had already had an impact on their lives. Each one of her friends came up and said their goodbyes, some even taking the time to pray again. Rick's parents were the last to say their goodbyes, and Rick's mom said, it is storming toward the house. It is very fitting, since she was born during a storm, she would leave in one. Rick and I tearfully said our goodbyes to Sierra for now, and told her to go be with Shiloh, and we would see them both again. The nurse took her off the machine and said it could be up to 30 minutes or longer for all the air to get out of her body. However, God was there. He knew the pain we were going through, and he wasn't going to put us through that. Within 3 minutes, our breath was gone. We both felt a peace in that room because we knew that her brother had come to escort her home. The devil wasted no time in showing his ugly face. The peace I had just felt a few minutes ago turned to complete fear. I thought to myself what Rick had said about why could we not keep at least one of our kids. My thoughts became negative. Would he turn his back on God? Would he still love me? Would our marriage survive? Just as quick as the devil put those thoughts in my head, God was already on the scene. Rick reached and put his arm around me, kissed me, and said, "I love you, Crystal Stewart. We started our journey together, just you and me. And if God wants it to be just us, then that is the way we will finish it." I cried tears of relief because God had calmed my fears once again and gave me the comfort that I needed. As we left the hospital, we looked toward Kings Mountain. There was lightning in the horizon, as if Sierra was saying, "It's okay, I'm home." The day we were to receive friends early that morning, we were awakened by a phone call. And the funeral director said that Sierra's clothes would not fit her because she was so swollen from the oscillator, and we may want to consider putting a gown on her that was high on the neck and long sleeves to cover up the scars from the event, or consider a closed casket. I did not deal with that very well. I became extremely emotional. Sierra was beautiful. She always made sure her makeup, hair, and clothes were just right. I wanted her to look as beautiful as she was. I managed to get in the shower, but all I could do was think about was what the funeral director told me. I began to pray and ask God to do something so that we could keep the casket open, to please let her look as beautiful as she was. After calming down and getting a shower, Rick and I went to Belk's store to see if we could find a gown that would not look like sleepwear. When we got there, we had no idea where to begin. Every time I looked at something, I would just get upset and cry. However, God had already taken care of the situation. He had the right sales associate in the right place. She came up to us and asked if she could help. I tried to tell her, but started crying. Rick told her while we were there. She immediately said, "Let me pray with you." She prayed with us right there in Belk's. When she finished, she said, "I will find your daughter something to wear," and she did. She found a beautiful cowl neck shirt and a black pair of pants. It fit her perfectly, and she looked beautiful. As we drove up to the church for the memorial service, our breath was taken away at the amount of friends that came out to support us. The church was packed. Friends were standing along the walls, down the halls, and in every Sunday school class there was. Even the picnic area outside the church was full. During the service, one of Sierra's friends sang the song "Legacy." My heart was so broken, but as I listened to the song, my heart overflowed with joy, knowing that Sierra indeed had left such a legacy. The days to follow were hard. It was a Christmas season. Rick decided to take 2 months off work, and my company allowed me to come and go as I wanted to. God truly blessed us. On days Rick had bad days, I had good days, so I could be his comfort. And when I had my bad days, Rick had good days, and he could comfort me. And believe me, we had plenty of days when we felt like giving up. The songs, the sounds, the memories of Christmas past, everything flooded our minds. God gave us the dearest of friends that kept us as busy as possible during this season, from early morning Christmas breakfast gatherings at the Brackett's to late night suppers with the Ledfords. Christmas was a little quieter without Shiloh and Sierra, and it was hard for us, but we knew that Shiloh and Sierra were running the streets of golden heaven with each other this Christmas. Rick and I knew no matter what came our way, God was always there to let us know He had not left our side. Nighttime was the hardest for us after everyone went home and the house was quiet. I tried to get back into the routine of reading my Bible before I went to bed. It was hard for me to read, but I kept feeling a drawing to the Bible. Most of the time when I would go to read, I would start thinking of Shiloh and Sierra and wondering why God took both of them, and I would find myself in tears and asking God the same question I had asked before. When I would finally stop crying, I would look down at my Bible to start reading it, and I would read a verse that would bless my soul and give me comfort. It would be just what I needed. I would get excited and tell Rick about it the next day and go to show him, but when I went back to where I read it, the verse wasn't there. After several times of this, I realized that God had given me scripture to help me at this time I needed it. I knew then that God was my comforter, my rock, and I could lean on Him through the storms of my life, and that He would always be there for me. A year after Sierra's death, I began longing for another child. I began praying. You see, Rick had had a vasectomy several years back. I prayed for God to reverse it. As Rick and I sat down at supper one night, I told him I wanted to have another baby. He quickly reminded me that it was impossible. We talked about adoption and also the possibility of a snowflake baby, but my heart was not into that. I wanted to have a baby. After much prayer, we decided to move forward with it. Rick had the reversal done, but the outcome was not what we had expected. Only one side could be repaired. We were informed that might not be enough. We did not give up. It was my time now. I went to the doctor and we explained our situation and why, at my age, I wanted another baby. With my age, he did not hesitate. He sent us to the Reach Center in Charlotte. I was put on fertility medication and they recommended in vitro to help the process along. We began the process in September, and in November I still was not pregnant. I told Rick that I did not want to keep trying, that every time they told me I wasn't pregnant, it felt like losing Shiloh and Sierra all over again. I could not do it anymore. On Wednesday night before Thanksgiving, Rick and I went to the altar and poured our hearts out to God. We told God we would take one more treatment, but that would be the last one. We were not trying anymore, and that if this was not His will for us to have another child, but we would leave it in His hands, and we did exactly that. On December 31st, 2005, we made our trip to Charlotte for blood work. My heart was heavy because I was afraid that maybe my decision to have another child was not God's will. I prayed before we left and told God, no matter what happens, I want it to be your will. A few hours after we returned home, the nurse called the Reach Center. She said, "Congratulations, you are pregnant." I thought I heard her wrong and said, "I am pregnant?" Rick heard me and he came and stood by my side. I looked at him and said, "I am." God once again showed His love, mercy, and grace to us. Our due date was set for September 3rd, 2006. God, however, had other plans. A week later, on September 11th, 2006, Chesney Michaela Stewart graced us with her presence weighing 9 pounds, 3.5 ounces. As tears of joy ran down both our faces, at that moment we knew God gave us the miracle we asked for back in the trauma center 2 years ago. Chesney is a miracle. She has a combination of her brother and her sister in her, with an added bonus of her own personality in the mix. All three wrapped in one beautiful package. Our story is bittersweet. Had God not taken Shiloh and Sierra, Chesney would not be here. I cannot imagine my life without her. I do miss and think of Shiloh and Sierra every day, and I talk about them as much as possible. Even now, I have days that I ask God, why could I not have had Shiloh, Sierra, and Chesney? God does not always give us the answers we want, but He is there to give us comfort and peace with any situation we face in this life. We just need to ask and humble ourselves and ask Him for help. Rick and I try not to dwell on our circumstances of their deaths. We think of the happy times and what we did together as a family. We held nothing back from Chesney about their deaths and their life. We want her to know her brother and her sister and how many people they have touched in their 17 years they lived. And by the way, I tell everybody this, 17 in the Bible means victory, and they won their victory over this world. Rick and I have been asked if we would let Chesney get her driver's license. Our response is yes. She took the classroom part of driver's ed in March. I did not have any emotional distress from the classroom part, and I believe that was because the day Chesney began, a dear friend and church member, Vicki Walker, came into the office and we talked about Chesney, and she prayed with me that day and for Chesney's safety. However, in April, when Chesney walked out into the classroom and went to the driver's ed car, fear came over me and I could not breathe. As I watched her pull out of the driveway, it became worse. My heart began to pound and I started crying as hard as I could. I thought, what if God takes her too? Thoughts of Shiloh and Sierra and what happened to them and what had happened to Chesney overtook my mind. I laid my head down on the steering wheel of my car and begged God to please keep her safe and to put a hedge of protection around her. My thoughts were that I could not keep her safe anymore, and my fear of losing her became overwhelming. I prayed even more for God to keep her safe and to take this fear away from me. I knew no matter what, I had to leave it in His hands. I remembered the prayer Vicki said that day in the office. My cries turned to snubs, and I said to myself, Crystal, you have to stop this. You have to trust God. You have no other choice. I managed to take my car and drive myself to work, still crying and praying the whole way. That day was hard. Much harder than I thought it would be. I do know that God heard my cries that day, and we cannot hold Chesney back from doing the normal things in life as much as I would like to. We cannot put her in a bubble. Rick and I won't let Chesney to live her life and follow the plan God has for her. With all my heart, I know that God has Chesney here for a reason, and I have to put her in His care. We dedicated her to God when she was born, and she belongs to Him. I don't know what the future will hold for her, but my prayer every day is for her safety and for God to direct her path in life. In closing, death is traumatizing, whether it's a child, spouse, or parent. One thing Rick and I learned from this is that you must trust God and ask for His guidance. Don't ever shut Him out. When you feel yourself going into what we call that dark place, call on the name of Jesus and ask Him to get you out of that state of mind. God will help you, but you have to be willing to let Him. Yes, the pain is still there, but God can and will get you through it. My therapy and strength comes from my Jesus and His Word. Psalm 62, 7-8 says, "And God is my salvation and my glory, the rock of my strength, and my refuge is in Him." Trust in Him at all times. Pour out your heart before Him. God is a refuge for us. So if you are going through anything that you feel you cannot control or get over, God will always be your refuge. Just trust Him with your whole heart and ask Him to help you. He can also do for you what He's done for me. Thank you.